My sister handed me 2 small white pills, told me they were for my allergies, and 20 minutes later I was on my kitchen floor, choking on air that wouldn't come. The police would later tell me she had switched the labels. But the question that still keeps me up at night isn't how she did it. It's why. My name is Lauren Price. I'm 35 years old, and until recently, I believed I lived a quiet, ordinary life in a small Indiana town where people wave from their porches and ask about the weather more often than they ask how you're really doing. I work as an accountant. Numbers make sense to me. They follow rules. They add up. They don't lie. People, I've learned, are different. I'm telling you this story because for 8 years I thought I was failing at life. I thought I was careless with money, bad at adulthood, somehow less capable than everyone around me. I blamed myself for doors that wouldn't open, for loan applications that came back stamped with polite rejection letters. I believed I just wasn't trying hard enough. What I didn't know was that someone I loved had been quietly dismantling my life from the inside. It started on a Thursday afternoon that felt completely normal. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. Normally, I let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something nudged me to answer. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Mr. Hendrick, my grandfather Harold's attorney. Grandpa had passed away 2 weeks earlier. Even saying that still felt strange. He was the steady one in my life, the one who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, who called just to ask what book I was reading. After Grandma Eleanor died 5 years ago, he seemed smaller somehow, but never distant, never cold. Mr. Hendrick explained that the will reading was scheduled for Monday morning. Then he paused. "There is a sealed portion of the will," he said carefully, "that your grandfather insisted can only be opened if you are physically present. Not your parents, not your sister, you." I leaned back in my chair, heart doing something unfamiliar. In my family, I was rarely the only anything. I was the practical daughter, the quiet one, the one who handled her own problems and didn't make waves. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Very sure," he replied. When we hung up, I just sat there for a moment, staring at my computer screen. Grandpa Harold had singled me out. That meant something. 2 months before he died, he'd called me unexpectedly and asked strange questions about my finances. Had I checked my credit report recently? Was I having trouble with loans? I laughed it off at the time. I told him everything was fine. It wasn't. For years, my credit score had been a mystery I couldn't solve. I paid my bills on time. I had no debt, at least none that I knew of. And yet, every time I applied for a home loan, the answer was no. 3 rejections in a row, each one more confusing than the last. I blamed myself. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I misunderstood how adulthood worked. Maybe I just wasn't as competent as I thought. Grandpa had gone quiet on the phone that day when I insisted everything was fine. He mentioned Grandma Eleanor's name, then changed the subject. I didn't push. I wish now that I had. Grandma's death still felt like an open window in winter, cold air seeping in when you least expect it. She used to braid my hair when I was little and call me her brave girl. After she passed, I waited for something, a letter, a keepsake, a small token that said she'd thought of me in her final days. Elise handled the estate. She told me Grandma wasn't sentimental about material things. I accepted that explanation because I didn't want to seem greedy or needy. A few months later, I noticed Elise wearing a pearl necklace I'd never seen before. When I asked about it, she smiled and said she found it at an estate sale. I believed her. Why wouldn't I believe my own sister? Within an hour of the attorney's call, Elise phoned me. Her tone was unusually warm, almost rehearsed. "What time are you leaving Monday?" she asked. "Early," I said. "Which route are you taking?" "It's a long drive." "I'll figure it out." "And how are your allergies? They've been bad lately, right?" I laughed. "Yeah, seasonal stuff." Looking back, I can see how precise her questions were. At the time, I just thought she was being thoughtful. That evening, I was settling in for a quiet night when she texted me. "Stopping by with stronger allergy medicine. You need to be well rested for Monday." I smiled at the message. I had installed a security camera system 2 years earlier after a break-in. It wasn't paranoia, just practicality. When her car pulled into my driveway, I watched on the small monitor in my kitchen. She stepped out, holding a white pharmacy bag. When I opened the door, she hugged me. It lingered longer than usual. Her perfume was the same as always, soft, floral, but something about the way she held me felt intentional. "These are better than your usual brand," she said, pressing the bag into my hand. "Take 2 before bed. You'll sleep like a baby." I noticed her glance briefly toward the camera mounted in the corner of my living room. "Still got that thing running?" she asked lightly. "Always," I said. "Habit." She smiled again, but her eyes flickered for just a second. If you'd asked me then whether I trusted her, I would have said yes without hesitation. Because trust, when it's built over a lifetime, doesn't crumble easily. It doesn't scream warnings. It whispers, and only if you're listening. After she left, I poured myself a glass of water and looked at the pills in my palm. They were small, ordinary, harmless looking. I didn't double-check the label. I didn't question why she seemed so invested in whether I took them. I swallowed them exactly as she instructed. 2 pills, 1 glass of water, a soft blanket on the couch, the evening news murmuring in the background. I remember thinking how nice it was that we seemed to be getting closer lately. For years, I'd felt like the afterthought in my own family. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe things were changing. About 20 minutes later, my throat began to tighten. At first, I told myself it was just allergies acting up. But deep down, something colder was forming. Something that would change everything. And I had no idea that the sister I trusted most had just set something in motion that would unravel my entire life. At first, I told myself it was just my allergies reacting to something in the air. That was the logical explanation. My throat felt tight before, during peak pollen season. My eyes had burned. My chest had felt heavy. I tried to stay calm, to breathe slowly the way doctors recommend. But this was different. The tightness didn't settle. It intensified. It felt as if invisible hands were pressing inward on my windpipe, squeezing, testing how much air I truly needed. I swallowed and felt nothing move. My tongue tingled. My heartbeat began to pound so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears, fast and uneven, like it was trying to escape my chest. I sat up on the couch, suddenly alert. The room tilted slightly. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the edges of everything had started to blur into gray. The television's voices sounded distant, underwater. "This isn't right," I whispered to myself. I tried to stand. My knees buckled. I hit the carpet hard enough to knock over the lamp beside the couch. The bulb shattered, but even the sharp crack of glass felt muffled, as if my body had already begun separating from the world around it. That's when fear truly arrived, not panic, not yet, but recognition. I knew what anaphylaxis was. I had mild allergies my entire life. I avoided certain triggers. I was careful. I carried antihistamines in my purse. I had never experienced a reaction this violent, this fast. And I had just swallowed 2 pills Elise gave me. A cold realization slid through me, sharper than the lack of oxygen. Those pills were not what she said they were. My phone sat on the coffee table only a few feet away. It might as well have been miles. I dragged myself forward, my palms slipping against the rug. My lungs burned. Each breath came thinner than the last, like I was inhaling through a straw. My fingers brushed the edge of the table and knocked the phone to the floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. I fumbled for it, vision narrowing, hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock the screen. I dialed 911. When the operator answered, I tried to speak clearly, but my voice came out fragmented, broken by desperate gasps. "Can't breathe. 214 Willow Street." I forced my address out piece by piece, clinging to consciousness long enough to know the information had landed somewhere beyond my collapsing body. Then everything went black. The next thing I remember was the faint wail of sirens bleeding into the darkness, like a distant memory trying to pull me back. I learned later that my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, heard them and stepped outside in her bathrobe, concerned. She saw the ambulance in front of my house and didn't hesitate. She ran across the lawn and found the paramedics inside my living room, working over me. They told me later my lips had turned blue. My pulse was erratic. My airway nearly closed. Mrs. Patterson held my hand while they loaded me onto the stretcher. She rode in the ambulance beside me, her small, steady fingers wrapped around mine like an anchor. She stayed in the waiting room all night, refusing to leave even when nurses suggested she go home and rest. I woke up in the intensive care unit Friday morning. The ceiling above me was sterile white. Machines beeped softly at my side. An oxygen mask covered my face. Tubes ran from my arms. My throat felt raw and swollen, like I had swallowed fire. For a moment, I didn't remember what had happened. Then it came back all at once. The pills. Elise. The hug that lasted too long. A nurse noticed my eyes open and leaned in gently. "You're very lucky," she said. Another 10 minutes, and it might have been too late. 10 minutes. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to process the fact that my life had almost ended on my living room floor because I trusted my sister. Later that afternoon, when I was stable enough to speak, a woman in a dark blazer stepped into my room. Her posture was straight, her expression professional, but not unkind. "Lauren Price?" she asked. I nodded carefully. "I'm Detective Martinez." Something in her tone told me this wasn't a courtesy visit. She pulled a chair closer to my bed and opened a thin folder. "We need to talk about your sister, Elise." The words landed like a second blow. There must be some mistake, I rasped through the oxygen mask. "She brought me allergy medicine." Detective Martinez's gaze didn't shift. "The pills you ingested were not allergy medication." A chill crawled over my skin. They contained a compound known to trigger severe anaphylactic reactions in individuals with your documented allergy profile. She continued. The label had been switched. Switched. My stomach dropped. "This wasn't an accident?" I whispered. She shook her head slowly. "We believe your sister intentionally altered the labeling." The room felt smaller, harder to breathe in, even with oxygen feeding into my lungs. But that wasn't the worst part. "Miss Price," she continued, "your sister has been under federal investigation for identity theft for 6 months." I stared at her blankly. "The primary victim," she said carefully, "is you. If I had been standing, I think I would have fallen again." She opened the folder and turned it toward me. Account statements, credit lines, addresses I didn't recognize, my name typed neatly across forms I had never seen. Over the course of 8 years, someone had opened 7 credit accounts in my name. The total fraudulent debt reached $187,000. I felt something inside me fracture, not loudly, but cleanly. Every rejection letter, every bank officer's polite smile. Every time I walked out of a loan meeting feeling smaller than when I entered, it wasn't incompetence. It wasn't carelessness. It was Elise. She made regular minimum payments, Detective Martinez explained. Just enough to prevent collections from escalating. That kept alerts from reaching you. It allowed the accounts to remain active without triggering immediate investigations. Strategic. Sustained. Calculated. For 8 years, my sister had been building a secret life funded by my name while sitting across from me at family dinners asking how work was going. I could have collapsed into grief right then. I could have cried. But instead, something harder rose up inside me. Clarity. "Do you have security cameras?" she asked. "Yes," I said immediately. "Good. We'll need that footage." As soon as she stepped out to make a call, I reached for my phone. My hands still trembled, but not from weakness anymore. I logged into my cloud storage and changed every password. I locked the footage. I backed it up to multiple locations. If Elise thought she could erase what she'd done, she was wrong. My second call was to the 3 major credit bureaus. I requested emergency freezes on all accounts. No new credit lines would open under my name ever again. Then, when Detective Martinez returned, I looked at her directly. "I want copies of everything," I said. "Every document. Every timeline. I'm done being confused about my own life." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Lying in that hospital bed, oxygen hissing quietly beside me, I realized something that would change me permanently. The pills were meant to silence me, but they had done the opposite. They had woken me up. From my hospital bed, I read the investigation file the way I normally read financial statements, slowly, line by line, looking for patterns, dates, account openings, payment histories, addresses tied to purchases I never made. The numbers didn't blur together the way they once had in those bank rejection letters. Now they formed a timeline, a story, and in that story, there was one date that made my entire body go still. The first fraudulent credit account had been opened 3 months after my grandmother Eleanor died. 3 months, not years later, not recently. 3 months after the woman who called me her brave girl was lowered into the ground. 3 months after Elise handled the estate. 3 months after I waited for something, anything from Grandma, a note, a small box, a piece of jewelry, a letter that told me she had thought of me at the end. Instead, Elise had sat across from me at the kitchen table and said gently, "Grandma wasn't sentimental about material things, Lauren. There wasn't really anything to divide." I remembered nodding. I remembered forcing a smile because I didn't want to seem childish. I didn't want to look greedy. I told myself love didn't need objects, but the ache had lingered anyway. And now, staring at that timeline in a sterile hospital room, I felt something cold and terrible begin to connect. Detective Martinez noticed the shift in my face. "You see something," she said quietly. I swallowed. My throat still felt raw from the oxygen mask. "The first account," I whispered. "It was right after my grandmother died." She leaned forward slightly. Identity theft often escalates after a successful first act. The offender gains confidence. If there were no consequences early on, they push further. Push further. My mind replayed memories I hadn't questioned before. The pearl necklace. I saw it clearly now, Elise, wearing it at Thanksgiving the year after Grandma died. It had caught the light from the chandelier, soft and luminous. I'd commented on how beautiful it was. "Oh, I found it at an estate sale," she said casually. "Vintage pieces are coming back." I had believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my sister. But now, that memory felt different, sharper, wrong in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel at the time. "Did your grandmother leave a will?" Detective Martinez asked. "Yes," I said slowly. "Elise handled everything. She told me there was nothing specifically left to me. And you trusted that?" I gave a small, humorless laugh. "She's my sister." The words sounded naive now. The more I reviewed the timeline, the more a pattern emerged. The accounts weren't random. They were deliberate. Opened in waves, closed strategically. Payments made just often enough to prevent flags, but not enough to eliminate debt. It wasn't reckless theft. It was sustained manipulation. And it began at a moment when I was grieving. That detail lodged in my chest like a splinter. I spent the rest of the weekend in the hospital, my body slowly recovering while my mind moved backward through the years. Every kindness Elise had shown me felt staged now. Every offer to help with paperwork. Every time she'd brushed off my financial confusion with a sympathetic sigh. "I'm sure it's just a clerical error," she'd say. "Banks mess things up all the time." And I believed her because believing her was easier than suspecting her. On Sunday evening, just as the sky outside my hospital window turned the muted orange of late summer, my phone rang again. It was Mr. Hendrick, Grandpa Harold's attorney. "The will reading is still scheduled for Monday morning," he said gently. "Your grandfather was very specific about the timing." There was a pause, like he was deciding how much to say. "There's something else. A private nurse named Margaret will meet you tomorrow at 7 a.m. She has instructions to deliver something to you directly. It was your grandfather's request." My pulse quickened. "Deliver what?" "I'm not sure," he admitted. He didn't disclose the contents, only that it must be given to you personally. No substitutions, no intermediaries, no substitutions. The phrase echoed in my mind long after we hung up. I stared at the ceiling that night, sleep refusing to come. Grandpa had always been careful, thoughtful. He measured his words the way I measured numbers. If he arranged something like this, it wasn't sentimental whim, it was intentional. And the sealed portion of the will that required my presence, that didn't feel like coincidence anymore. An unsettling thought began to form. What if Grandpa knew? 2 months before he died, he'd called and asked about my credit. I brushed him off. I didn't want to burden him with my problems. I told him everything was fine. But he hadn't sounded convinced. He'd mentioned Grandma Eleanor's name during that call and then gone quiet. I'd assumed he was just reminiscing. Now I wondered if he'd been trying to tell me something and couldn't find the words. Around midnight, I pulled up my credit report again on my phone, scrolling through pages of accounts that didn't belong to me. Purchases in cities I'd never visited, hotel bookings, designer retailers, electronics. A life Elise couldn't have afforded on her salary. I thought about her apartment far nicer than mine, her car sleek and new, my parents bragging about her ambition, about how well she was doing, and I thought about my own tiny house, my aging sedan, the way my father once joked that I should aim higher like Elise. Shame I'd carried for years began to dissolve, replaced by something else, anger. But beneath the anger was grief, not just for the money, not just for the credit score, for the years I doubted myself, for the nights I lay awake wondering why adulthood felt harder for me than everyone else. And for my grandmother, if Elise had been bold enough to steal my identity, what else had she taken? The thought felt almost unbearable. Early Monday morning, I was discharged. The doctors insisted I rest, but I insisted on leaving. I needed to be at that will, reading. I needed to look my family in the eye. I sat in the hospital lobby waiting for my cab, pale and still slightly weak, when a woman in her 60s approached me. She carried a worn leather bag and wore the kind of calm expression you only see on people who've spent years caring for others. "Lauren?" she asked softly. "Yes, I'm Margaret. I was your grandfather's hospice nurse." The air shifted around me. She sat beside me and lowered her voice. "Your grandfather gave me very specific instructions. If anything happened to you, if you were ever in the hospital or in any kind of trouble, I was to give these directly to you." She reached into her bag and pulled out 2 items, a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, and a small USB drive. My fingers trembled as I took them. "He made me promise," she said gently. "No one else was to touch these. No one else." I thought about Elise, about the sealed portion of the will, about the forged documents Detective Martinez had mentioned could be part of her pattern. A strange, steady certainty began to take shape inside me. Grandpa hadn't just suspected something. He had prepared for it. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. The paper felt heavier than it should have. My name, written in that familiar shaky script, seemed almost alive. For years, I thought I was the one falling behind. But as I sat there in the hospital lobby, pearls of doubt and betrayal stringing together into something undeniable, I realized something that changed everything. I hadn't been failing. I had been sabotaged, and whatever was on that USB drive was about to prove it. I didn't open the envelope right away. For a few seconds, I just sat there in the hospital lobby with Margaret beside me, staring at my grandfather's handwriting like it might disappear if I blinked too hard. My name curved across the front in the same careful script he used for birthday cards and Christmas envelopes. Seeing it now, after everything that had happened in the last 72 hours, felt like standing on the edge of something irreversible. "Would you like somewhere private?" Margaret asked gently. I nodded. She led me down a quiet hallway near the outpatient offices, found an empty consultation room, and closed the door behind us. "I'll wait outside," she said. "Take your time. Take your time." I wasn't sure time had ever felt this heavy before. I sat at the small table, laid the envelope in front of me, and broke the seal. Inside was a single, folded sheet of paper. "My brave girl, if you are reading this, I was right to worry. Watch the video before you face them. And know this, your grandmother never forgot you. What Elise took from you 5 years ago, I have done my best to return." My vision blurred almost immediately. Grandma never forgot you. 5 years of quiet grief cracked open at once. 5 years of telling myself not to be childish, not to expect tokens or letters or proof. 5 years of pretending it didn't hurt that nothing of hers had come to me. And Grandpa was telling me it had Elise had just never delivered it. My hands shook as I picked up the USB drive. I pulled my laptop from my bag, my old, reliable machine that had survived more late-night spreadsheets than I could count, and inserted the drive. The file opened automatically. Grandpa Harold's face filled the screen. He looked thinner than I remembered, frail, propped against pillows in what I recognized as his hospice room, but his eyes were clear, fierce, intent. "Lauren," he said, and hearing my name in his voice nearly broke me. "If you are watching this, then I ran out of time." He took a slow breath before continuing. 6 months ago, I was sorting through your grandmother Eleanor's belongings. I found her diary in a box of old photographs. I had never read it before. I thought it belonged to her privacy. But after she was gone, I felt I owed it to her to understand what she carried in her final days. He lifted a small, leather-bound journal into view. The last entry was written the week before she died. He opened it carefully and began to read. "I gave the letter and mother's pearls to Elise to deliver to Lauren. I hope my brave girl knows how proud I am of her." My heart stopped. The room felt too small, too bright. Grandpa's voice faltered slightly, but he continued. "Lauren, your grandmother left you her mother's pearl necklace and a handwritten letter. She was very clear about it. She said those pearls were meant for the granddaughter who inherited her spirit." A sob escaped my throat before I could stop it. "I went looking for them," Grandpa said quietly. "They were not in Eleanor's jewelry box. I found them later, in Elise's." The words landed like a physical blow. She had been wearing them. When I confronted her, she claimed there had been a misunderstanding. But I knew better. My mind flashed to Thanksgiving. The soft glow of pearls against Elise's collarbone. The way she had laughed when I complimented them. Estate sale. It had never been an estate sale. The letter, Grandpa continued, was nowhere to be found. I believe she destroyed it. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to contain the sound rising in my chest. For 5 years, I had carried the quiet ache of thinking Grandma hadn't left me anything. That maybe I hadn't mattered in her final thoughts the way she had mattered in mine. And all along, my sister had been wearing proof that I did. Grandpa's expression hardened slightly. When I discovered this, I began looking more closely at other things. I hired a private investigator. I asked questions, and what I found disturbed me deeply. He paused, as if choosing each word with care. "Elise has been using your identity, opening accounts in your name, accumulating debt. I contacted Detective Martinez, who was already investigating related activity. We began building a case." My breath caught. He knew. 2 months ago, when he called asking about my credit, he had already suspected. "I tried to tell you," he said, regret flickering across his face. "I asked about your finances. I hoped you would open the door to the conversation. But you told me everything was fine, and I was afraid to shatter your world without proof." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "I needed to gather evidence. I needed it to be airtight, because if Elise sensed you knew, she would destroy everything. She would manipulate your parents. She would turn the story against you." That sounded painfully accurate. Grandpa leaned closer to the camera, voice lower now. "If you are watching this from a hospital room, then she has made her move." The words froze me. "She knows I left you something sealed in my will. She will attempt to intercept it. She may produce a forged document claiming you authorized her to collect your mail. Do not let her." A chill traveled down my spine. It was exactly the kind of calculated move Elise would make. "She has done it before," Grandpa said firmly. "She intercepted Eleanor's letter. She told you your grandmother was not sentimental. That was a lie." The certainty in his voice felt like an anchor in the storm inside me. "Lauren," he continued softly, "your grandmother saw you. She knew the way this family overlooked you while praising your sister. She admired your strength, your kindness. She left you those pearls not because you demanded attention, but because you never did." My chest tightened for a different reason now, not fear, not anger, but recognition. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I have recovered the pearls. They will be returned to you. I have also taken steps to ensure your financial situation is resolved. I will not allow your future to be destroyed. I stared at the screen. Resolved? I wish I had more time, he finished. But if you are watching this, then you are stronger than she expected. Walk into that room knowing the truth, and know that you were always loved. The video ended. The screen went black. For a long moment, I just sat there, the quiet hum of the laptop fan the only sound in the room. My hands rested flat on the table as if I needed something solid beneath them. Everything inside me felt rearranged. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. Not just financial, not just criminal. It was personal. It was layered. It stretched back years, wrapped itself around grief, and hid behind smiles. But alongside the betrayal was something else: validation. I hadn't imagined the subtle dismissals. I hadn't been overly sensitive. My grandmother had seen it. My grandfather had seen it. I wasn't invisible. I had just been surrounded by people who chose not to look. I folded Grandpa's letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I closed my laptop and stood up slowly. When I opened the door, Margaret was still there. She studied my face and seemed to understand without words. "He loved you very much," she said softly. "I know," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. And for the first time since my throat had closed on my living room floor, I felt something other than fear or shock. I felt prepared. Elise thought she had silenced me, but my grandfather had just handed me the truth, and with it, the strength to walk straight into whatever waited next. Detective Martinez was already waiting for me in the parking lot when my cab pulled up to the attorney's office. The morning air was crisp, the kind that usually feels refreshing, but that day, it felt sharp against my skin. I was still physically weak, my body not fully recovered from what Elise had given me, but inside I felt steadier than I had in years. Martinez approached without a word and held out a small velvet box. "For you," she said quietly. My fingers hesitated before opening it, but when I did, I felt my breath leave my body all over again. Grandma Eleanor's pearls lay coiled inside, luminous and unmistakable. For 5 years, I had believed they had never been meant for me. For 5 years, I had watched Elise wear them at holidays and birthdays, thinking I was foolish for feeling hurt over something so small. They were never small. They were proof. "They were recovered this morning," Martinez said. "Search warrant executed at Elise's apartment at dawn." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Then, with hands that trembled only slightly, I lifted the necklace and fastened it around my neck. The pearls were cool against my skin, but they warmed quickly, settling into place as if they had always belonged there. Maybe they had. "Are you ready?" Martinez asked. I looked toward the building. Through the glass doors, I could see faint movement inside. My parents were already there. Elise, too, no doubt composed and rehearsed. "I am," I said. We walked in together, though Martinez remained a few steps behind me. I wanted to enter that room on my own. The conference room fell silent the moment I stepped through the doorway. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's expression shifted from confusion to something like shock, and Elise went completely still. Her eyes locked onto the pearls at my throat. The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost fascinating to watch. For a split second, her polished exterior cracked, revealing something raw beneath fear. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The pearls were speaking for me. I took my seat at the long table. The attorney, Mr. Hendrick, cleared his throat and began reading the will. His voice was steady, formal, moving through legal language that might have felt dry on any other day. But not this one. I watched Elise carefully while he spoke. She kept her posture straight, her expression carefully blank, but I saw her fingers gripping her purse a little too tightly. I wondered if she had brought forged documents, just as Grandpa predicted. I wondered if she had planned to intercept something again. Then Mr. Hendrick reached the part that shifted the room entirely. 70% of the estate, he read, is to be transferred to Lauren Price. The words hung in the air like a bell that had just been struck. My mother let out a small, involuntary sound. My father stared at the table as if he had misheard. Elise's jaw tightened so visibly that I almost expected to hear her teeth grind. Mr. Hendrick continued, reading the written explanation Grandpa had included. "This allocation is not favoritism," the letter stated. "It is compensation for what has been taken from my granddaughter and recognition of a character that remained kind despite receiving little kindness from her own family." Silence. Not just quiet, but stunned, suffocating silence. For years, I had felt like the extra piece in our family puzzle. The dependable one. The one who didn't cause trouble. And now, in a single paragraph, Grandpa had said what no one else ever had. I had endured something unfair, and it mattered. When the reading concluded, Elise stood abruptly. "I need some air," she said, her voice controlled but brittle at the edges. She reached for her purse and headed toward the door. I didn't move. Through the window of the conference room, I saw Detective Martinez step forward. 2 uniformed officers joined her, intercepting Elise just as she reached the parking lot beside her sleek car, the one I now understood had likely been paid for with my stolen credit. The door to the conference room was slightly ajar, and I could hear fragments of conversation outside. "Elise Price," Martinez said clearly, "you are under arrest for aggravated assault, federal identity theft, theft of property, and forgery." The words were calm, procedural. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was not. Elise's composure shattered instantly. "This is insane," she shouted. Then her gaze darted toward the window, toward our mother. "Mom," she screamed. Tell them I was helping you. Tell them you knew." The accusation sliced through the room like glass. My mother's face drained of color. She didn't stand. She didn't speak. She just stared. And in that moment, something shifted. Because Elise wasn't just panicking. She was exposing. My father rose halfway from his chair, confusion written across his face. "What is she talking about?" he demanded, looking between my mother and the door. No one answered. Outside, Elise struggled briefly before the officers guided her toward the patrol car. The image felt surreal. My sister, the golden child, the confident one being placed in the back seat of a police vehicle. But it wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was something heavier. A reckoning. Detective Martinez returned inside after a few minutes, her expression composed. She was in possession of a forged power of attorney document, she said calmly. Dated this morning. It authorized her to receive mail and legal documents on Lauren's behalf. Grandpa had predicted it exactly. I felt a strange mixture of grief and awe. Even in his final months, he had seen the pattern clearly enough to anticipate her next move. My mother finally spoke, her voice shaking. There must be some mistake. But even as she said it, her eyes wouldn't meet mine. My father looked at her, confusion slowly giving way to realization. "What do you mean she knew?" he asked, almost to himself. Detective Martinez didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at me, silently asking whether I wanted to continue this here. I nodded. I was done hiding from truth. As the officers drove Elise away, the conference room felt smaller than before. The illusion of our family, the polished version presented at holidays and graduations, had collapsed in less than an hour. And I sat there wearing my grandmother's pearls, no longer invisible. For the first time in my life, the narrative wasn't being shaped around me without my consent. It was unfolding in front of everyone, undeniable and documented. I thought about the night on my kitchen floor, the darkness closing in, my breath disappearing. I thought about how close Elise had come to ensuring I never made it to this room. She hadn't just wanted the money. She had wanted me gone. That realization settled in my chest, cold but clarifying. As my parents remained seated in stunned silence, I realized something else too. This wasn't the climax. It was the beginning of the truth, finally being spoken aloud. And this time, I wasn't going to be quiet. The door closed behind the officers, and for a moment, the only sound left in the conference room was the faint hum of the air conditioner. It was almost absurd how ordinary that sound was compared to what had just happened outside. My sister had just been arrested, and yet here we were, my parents and I, still sitting at the long polished table like we were waiting for coffee to be served. Detective Martinez didn't rush. She stepped back into the room with the same steady composure she had carried from the beginning, a thin folder now in her hands. She placed it on the table and looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Price," she said calmly, "we need to discuss your involvement." My mother's head snapped up. "Involvement?" she repeated, her voice trembling between indignation and fear. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just found out about this." I watched her carefully. For years, I had been trained to read subtle shifts in tone, the tiny pauses in her sentences. She had a way of speaking that made you doubt yourself before you doubted her. But something was different now. Detective Martinez opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. "These are bank statements from your personal account," she explained. "Over the last 3 years, you transferred monthly payments to your daughter Elise. The amounts correspond exactly with the minimum payments required on the fraudulent credit accounts opened in Lauren's name." My father leaned forward, squinting at the papers as if they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. "That can't be right," he said quietly. But the numbers didn't lie. I felt a strange stillness inside me. Not shock. Shock had burned through days ago. This was confirmation. My mother's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. "There are also text messages," Detective Martinez continued, sliding printed screenshots across the table. "Messages advising Elise on what to say if Lauren questioned her credit issues. I didn't need to read them to know what they said, but I did anyway. Tell her it's probably a mistake at the bank. Act sympathetic. Don't offer to help her investigate." The words blurred for a second as my eyes stung. 3 years. For 3 years, my mother had known. She had watched me struggle. She had listened to me talk about loan rejections, about confusion, about frustration. She had nodded and offered vague comfort, never once suggesting we look deeper. And every month, she had quietly helped Elise keep the lie intact. "There must be some explanation," my father insisted weakly, looking at my mother as if she could rescue them both from this moment. Detective Martinez didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She reached into the folder and pulled out one final document. "This email was recovered from Elise's computer," she said. "It was deleted, but retrievable." She placed it on the table. The subject line was blank. The message was short. "Just make sure she never finds out. I can't lose you too." My mother's hands began to shake. For a second, I thought she might still deny it, that she would lean into outrage or claim the messages were misinterpreted. Instead, something in her posture collapsed. Tears welled in her eyes, not loud sobs, not dramatic. Just quiet, heavy tears that slid down her face like they'd been waiting. "You don't understand," she whispered. The room held its breath. "I wasn't ready to be a mother when I had Lauren," she continued, her voice unsteady. "I was 22. I had plans. I wanted to travel, to build something for myself. But my father convinced me to keep the pregnancy." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly before darting away. "I tried," she said, as if that word alone could repair the damage. "But Lauren, you were always so independent, so self-sufficient. You never needed me." The words hit harder than any accusation. Never needed me. I thought about all the times I swallowed my questions, all the moments I told myself not to bother her. I had learned early that praise came more easily when I didn't ask for attention. "Elise needed me," my mother went on. "She called every day. She wanted advice. She wanted comfort. When I found out what she had done, I panicked. I couldn't lose the only daughter who still needed me." There it was. Not ignorance. Not confusion. Choice. For 3 years, she chose to protect the child who depended on her over the one who learned not to. My father looked as though someone had knocked the air out of him. "You knew?" he asked, his voice hollow. "For 3 years?" She didn't answer directly. She didn't have to. Detective Martinez slid another document forward. "A loan application from 5 years ago, co-signed by my father. Elise informed you," Martinez said evenly, "that Lauren had agreed to act as guarantor. You signed without confirming." My father stared at his own signature on the paper, then at me. "I thought she said you already approved it," he murmured. I felt a tired, almost distant sadness. "I didn't," I said quietly. Silence settled again, heavier this time. For years, my life had been subtly compared to Elise's. Her apartment, her car, her ambition. I had been the steady one, the quiet one, the one who didn't shine as brightly. It had never occurred to them to question how she afforded that shine. It was easier to believe I was simply less successful. My parents began arguing in low, sharp whispers, accusations that had clearly been building for decades, rising to the surface all at once. My mother blamed my father for not paying attention. My father blamed her for secrecy. Old resentments tangled with fresh betrayal, and I sat there listening to the sound of a family unraveling. Strangely, I didn't feel the urge to interrupt. I felt calm, not cold, not detached, just clear. For 8 years, I had carried shame that didn't belong to me. For 3 of those years, my mother had known that shame was misplaced and let me carry it anyway. I stood slowly, and the sound of my chair scraping against the floor cut through their argument. For 8 years, I said quietly, I thought I was failing. They both stopped talking. Every time I was denied a loan, every time a landlord looked at my credit and shook their head, I blamed myself. I looked at my mother first. You didn't make a mistake, I told her. You made a decision, and you made it every month. Then I looked at my father. And you didn't ask questions because it was easier to assume I just wasn't as capable. Neither of them met my eyes. Detective Martinez closed the folder gently. We'll be in touch regarding next steps, she said to my mother. There will be formal charges. My mother nodded faintly, as if accepting something she had always known might come. As the detective stepped out again, the room felt hollow. The version of my family I had spent my life trying to earn a place in no longer existed. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to fix it. I wasn't trying to make it comfortable. I was simply standing in the truth. The truth that I had not been invisible because I was unworthy. I had been invisible because it was convenient for them not to see me. And now, finally, they had no choice but to look. After the detective stepped out, the room felt suspended in a strange, fragile quiet. My parents sat across from me like strangers who had accidentally wandered into the wrong story. The polished table between us reflected the overhead lights, and for a moment I found myself staring at that reflection instead of their faces. It was easier to look at something steady. Mr. Hendrick cleared his throat softly, as if reminding us that not everything had finished unraveling yet. There is one final item, he said. His voice was gentle now, stripped of its earlier formality. He reached into his briefcase and removed a cream-colored envelope. The paper looked aged but carefully preserved. My name was written across the front in elegant, flowing handwriting that I would recognize anywhere. Grandma Eleanor's handwriting. My heart stumbled. She kept a duplicate of her letter with her personal attorney, Mr. Hendrick explained. Your grandfather retrieved it several months ago. For a second, I couldn't move. 5 years of wondering, 5 years of quiet hurt and unanswered questions were suddenly resting on the table in front of me. I reached for the envelope slowly, almost afraid it might vanish if I touched it too quickly. My fingers traced the ink of my name, the same loops and curves she used when she labeled jars of homemade jam. When she signed birthday cards with little hearts over the eyes, I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery. My brave girl. The first line blurred immediately as tears filled my eyes. I blinked them back and began to read aloud, not because I had to, but because I wanted every person in that room to hear what had been stolen from me. I know your life has not been easy in this family, I read, my voice unsteady but clear. I have seen how they overlook you while praising your sister. But I have also seen how you keep your heart soft anyway. That takes more courage than they will ever understand. The air shifted in the room. I swallowed and continued. I am leaving you my mother's pearls. They were meant for the granddaughter who inherited my spirit, not just my blood. Wear them and remember, you were always enough. You were always loved. Silence followed. But it wasn't the heavy silence of accusation or shock. It was something different, something almost sacred. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to cry fully. Not the restrained tears of confrontation, not the stunned tears of betrayal. These were different. These were tears of recognition. All those years, I had quietly questioned whether I mattered the way I hoped I did, whether my grandmother saw me the way I saw her, whether my steady, quiet presence was simply background noise in a family that celebrated louder personalities. She had seen me. She had known. She had tried to tell me. I pressed the letter against my chest for a moment, grounding myself in the weight of it. The pearls at my throat suddenly felt warmer, more alive, as if they carried her heartbeat through time. My mother reached toward me hesitantly. "Lauren," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Please, you have to understand." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time, without seeking approval. There was regret in her eyes. There was fear. There might even have been love. But there was also history. "I do understand," I said quietly. "That's the problem." She flinched as if the words had struck her. "I was young," she whispered. "I didn't know how to be what you needed." "You didn't try," I replied gently, not angrily. "There's a difference." The room held that truth without argument. My father sat rigidly in his chair, staring at the letter in my hands as though it were a mirror reflecting years he couldn't get back. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. For once, he had no easy explanation. I folded the letter carefully along its original crease and slipped it back into the envelope. I wasn't putting it away out of shame. I was protecting it. "I spent years wondering what I did wrong," I said softly. "Why things felt harder for me. Why I always seemed to fall short." I glanced at both of them. "But I didn't do anything wrong. I just didn't fit the version of daughter you preferred." The honesty didn't feel sharp. It felt clean. I picked up my purse and stood. For a split second, I considered walking out without another word. But something inside me urged me to leave differently, not in anger, not in silence, but in clarity. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I'm not going to carry what isn't mine anymore." My mother began to cry again, quietly this time. My father remained still, his shoulders slightly slumped, as though the weight of everything had finally settled on him. As I walked toward the door, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because justice had been served, though it was beginning to be, but because the truth no longer belonged only to me. It was out in the open now. In the lobby, I saw Mrs. Patterson waiting with a thermos of tea and a soft gray cardigan draped over her arm. She must have come as soon as she heard what happened. She stood when she saw me, her expression warm and steady. "Come on, dear," she said gently. "Let's get you somewhere quiet." The simplicity of her presence nearly undid me again. She had known me for only 2 years, yet she had sat through the night in a hospital waiting room. She had brought tea. She had shown up. No conditions, no comparisons, no expectations. As we stepped outside into the late morning sunlight, I took a deep breath. The air felt different now, cooler, clearer. I touched the pearls at my throat and thought about the way Grandma used to braid my hair, the way she'd look at me like I was already enough. For years, I thought I was fighting to earn a place in my own family. Now I understood something else. Love doesn't require performance. It doesn't require comparison. It doesn't require you to be louder or brighter than someone else. It simply sees you. As Mrs. Patterson wrapped the cardigan around my shoulders, I realized that family isn't defined by proximity or shared blood. It's defined by presence. And in that moment, walking away from the building that held so much truth and so much pain, I understood something I hadn't before. I was not walking away alone. I was walking toward a life that finally belonged to me. 6 weeks after the will reading, I woke up to the sound of birds moving through the apple trees outside my bedroom window. The light in my grandfather's cottage always arrives softly, filtered through lace curtains my grandmother hung decades ago. It's not the kind of dramatic sunrise you see in movies. It's gentle, steady, patient. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with dread pressing against my chest. There were no unfamiliar bills waiting in my mailbox, no sudden loan rejections, no invisible force sabotaging my future while I tried to understand what I had done wrong. The quiet in that house was real. It wasn't the tense quiet of things being hidden. It was the kind of quiet that comes when there is nothing left to conceal. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling beams my grandfather had refinished himself years ago. I let myself feel the stillness instead of rushing past it. I had spent so long bracing for the next problem that peace felt unfamiliar, but it was mine. I eventually rose, wrapped a cardigan around my shoulders, and walked into the small kitchen that still carried the faint scent of cinnamon from years of autumn baking. I made coffee the way Grandpa used to, slowly, carefully, as if the act itself deserved attention. While the kettle warmed, I glanced at the stack of mail on the counter, all legitimate, all transparent. My credit had been fully restored. Detective Martinez had confirmed what Grandpa mentioned in his video. Before he passed, he had quietly paid off the entire $187,000 in fraudulent debt that Elise accumulated in my name. When I first learned that, I cried harder than I did at the will reading, not because of the money, but because he had thought that far ahead. He didn't just expose the truth. He cleared the wreckage so I could begin again without debris following me. I touched the pearls at my throat as I poured my coffee. I wore them every day now, not as a statement, not as proof to anyone else, but as a reminder to myself. They weren't just jewelry. They were evidence of love that had survived theft, lies, and time. From the cottage's sunroom, I began rebuilding my career in a way that felt intentional. I opened a small bookkeeping practice for local businesses, family-owned shops, a florist down the road, a mechanic who admitted he hated paperwork, but trusted me immediately. 3 clients became 5. 5 became 8. Word spread quickly in a small town, especially when your work is consistent and your reputation clean. And for the first time, my success felt solid, not borrowed, not fragile. Every afternoon around 3, Mrs. Patterson would walk over from her house next door with a plate of something homemade cookies, banana bread, sometimes just a thermos of tea. We'd sit on the porch and talk about ordinary things, the weather, her granddaughter's school recital, which apple trees were ripening first. She never asked intrusive questions. She never tried to fix anything. She simply showed up. I began to understand that stability isn't loud, it's steady. Detective Martinez called one Thursday morning with final updates. Her voice was as calm as ever, but there was a quiet sense of completion in it. Elise is facing significant federal charges, she explained. Identity theft across state lines, aggravated assault related to the altered medication, theft of property for the pearls, and forgery for the power of attorney document. The sentencing range was substantial years, not months. My mother had been formally charged as an accessory after the fact for her role in concealing the fraud. Due to her age and clean prior record, she would not serve prison time, but she would carry a felony conviction and be required to testify. Restitution payments were ordered. My father was not criminally charged, but he filed for divorce shortly after the hearing. He sold the family home. He sent me a letter apologizing for his blindness, for not asking questions, for choosing the easier narrative. I read it once, then I placed it in a drawer. Not because I hated him, but because forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. About a month later, on a Saturday morning, I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway of the cottage. I looked through the window and saw both of my parents stepping out together. It was the first time they had stood side by side since the divorce papers were filed. I opened the door before they knocked. Their faces looked older than I remembered, not physically aged so much as worn. "I hope this isn't a bad time," my mother said quietly. I invited them inside because that's the kind of person my grandmother raised me to be, not because they had earned comfort. I made tea, set out cookies Mrs. Patterson had brought earlier that week. We sat at the small kitchen table that once held so many peaceful conversations between my grandparents. They didn't waste time. "Elise is facing 18 to 25 years, my father said. His voice cracked slightly. "There's a chance the judge could consider a letter from you, something requesting leniency." My mother's eyes filled with tears. She made terrible choices, but she's still our daughter. I listened without interrupting. For a long time, I had trained myself to listen, to absorb, to adjust, but this time was different. When they finished, I wrapped my hands around my teacup and spoke slowly. "For 8 years, I believed I was incompetent," I said. "I believed I was the reason doors kept closing." I looked at them both. She stole my name, my financial stability. She stole Grandma's letter. She tried to make sure I didn't even survive to hear the will. My voice remained calm. "I don't want her to suffer. I don't want revenge. But consequences exist for a reason." My mother began to speak, but I gently raised my hand. "I won't write that letter." The words felt firm but not cruel. Not because I hate her, but because protecting her from the consequences of her actions is what created this situation in the first place. Silence filled the cottage. My father nodded slowly, as though he had expected this answer, but needed to hear it anyway. My mother looked down at her hands. After a few minutes, they stood to leave. No dramatic exits, no shouting, just the quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. I watched their car disappear down the driveway, gravel crunching beneath the tires, and waited for the old ache to return. It didn't. That night, I sat in my grandfather's reading chair with Grandma's letter framed on the wall beside me. I had found a simple wooden frame at an antique shop and mounted the letter carefully. Beneath it, I placed a small card with words I wrote myself. Family is not who you are born to. It is who chooses you and who you choose back. Outside, the apple trees rustled in the evening breeze. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime Grandpa hung years ago sang 3 soft notes. I touched the pearls at my throat and closed my eyes. I got your letter, Grandma, I whispered into the quiet room, and I finally understand. The past will always be part of me. The betrayal, the confusion, the years of self-doubt they shaped who I am. But they no longer define me. What defines me now is something steadier. Truth, clarity, and the kind of peace that doesn't require anyone else's approval. For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I belong. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trust without question. This story isn't just about identity theft, poisoned pills, or a dramatic arrest in a parking lot. It's about something much deeper. It's about what happens when you spend years believing you are the problem, only to discover you were the target. It's about the quiet child in the family who learns to survive without being seen, and the moment she finally realizes she was never invisible, just overlooked. Lauren's journey isn't a revenge story. It's a reclamation story. She didn't win because her sister was arrested. She won because she stopped carrying shame that was never hers. She chose truth over silence, boundaries over guilt, peace over performance. If this story touched you, if you've ever questioned your worth because of how someone else treated you, I hope you remember this. Being overlooked does not mean you are unlovable. Thank you for listening. If you want more powerful, emotional stories like this, please subscribe to Hanjiwiye Yagi. Your support helps these stories continue, and you never know which one might feel like it was written just for you.